Welcome to the Post-Pandemic Freedom Show brought to you by Bold Molders. I'm Dr. Wayne Buchanan here with my friend.
I'm Joshua Shaffron. Thanks for tuning in.
Yeah, today we're continuing that conversation about Fred. And as jokingly, when we're talking about the success seesaw, I say something about Fred's that sixth grade bully that shows up when you're in fourth grade on the teeter-totter. But this is not really what Fred is. That's just me making one more link in that context. And I hear
Well,
that we
it
have
works.
something
It
from the
works
vault.
really well because that's exactly what's going on. Like, you think that you can just walk across that seesaw and have it tip wherever you want it to go. And you could if it wasn't for Fred. And Fred is the analogy for our unconscious conditioned behavior patterns, our thoughts, what we believe to be true, basically our past and everything that adds up to it. So that's the sum total of Fred. But there's an interview that I did that explains it all, and probably the best thing to do is just cue up the interview, and then we can come back and give you some more of a deeper dive if necessary.
Sounds good. Let's go to the vault.
It's funny. We have Fred, the flat-headed flea, to blame for being here today. Now, I know that sounds crazy, but Fred, and you can call him Sir Fred if you like, that's his formal name. He didn't always have a flat head. Let me tell you how he came to have this flat head. He was walking down the street, minding his own business, having a good old time. He had a good life, normal, everyday things, and all of a sudden, fate stepped out of nowhere and grabbed him, plucked him up off the street, and put him into this mason jar with a lid on it. And so Fred, like many of us, most of us, does not like being trapped, does not like being controlled. So feeling stuck, what does he do? He tries to get out, right? So he can't push the jar over. He can't wrestle it down. So a flea can jump, though, and jump really high, really strong. And he was like the best jumper in his class. So he starts jumping. And what does he do? Well, he smacks into the lid. And it hurts, right? But he doesn't care because he's getting out of there. He's determined, and all the things that his coaches told him, and jumping classes, and everything that his dad taught him about. Winners never quit and quitters never win, and all of that conditioning, all of that programming took over. And so what does he do? He jumps even harder, and he bangs his head into the lid of the jar. And of course, that's how he got his flat head. But that's not the whole story. Because what ended up happening is that he continued to, the fact that he flattened his head and hurt himself and he caused himself pain and he conditioned himself and he got that flat head, did that change the fact that he still wanted to get out of the jar? No, he still wanted freedom. That didn't change anything, but he still felt stuck. He still felt trapped in that jar because he was, right? And he had that limitation, the lid on the jar. So what does he do? Well, he teaches himself how to continue to try to get out of the jar, but not feel the pain anymore. So for him, that means he only jumps as high as the lid. He's capable, because he's the best jumper around, of jumping, much higher than where the lid is, but he's jumping, he trained himself, he conditioned himself to only jump just high enough to get to the lid so that he could still feel good about doing something, trying to have a modicum of control over his life, to try to still jumping for freedom because he still wants to get out. So he continues to try, he continues to work at it, works really hard at it, but he's only jumping as high as the lid. Fate steps in again, takes the lid of the jar off. And so Fred goes, oh, this is my chance, right? I'm going to jump right out of here because I'm perfectly capable, right? So he goes, I'm out of here. See you later. I'm out. Unfortunately, no. See, because again, he's conditioned himself because of that pain to believe that the lid's still there. So to him, jumping any higher than the lid is equals pain because that's what gave him the flat head. So he will continue to jump and jump and jump and jump, being perfectly capable, having no limits on him anymore, being perfectly capable of escape, perfectly capable of getting out of that jar. He stays stuck, unfortunately, in that jar, but it's a limitation that of his own making. It's a jail, if you will, a prison of his own making because of the fact that he conditioned himself to avoid that pain. and he doesn't challenge it. But now here's an interesting thing that's happened to him is that the reason he's going to die in there unless somebody comes along and tips the jar over, or fate steps in and takes him out of there again, or something happens beyond, outside of his control, he's going to die in there because he's believes now that his reality is he's trapped. He's accepted that reality. He's accepted that he's now trapped, and he's going to continue to jump because he can't sell out on himself, right? He can't feel like giving up, but he's only jumping as high as that lid once was, and he's burning himself out. He's never going to be able to get out of there unless he does something about that conditioning. Now you say, well, I'm not Fred. You're not Fred. Or are we? Because we all have these flat-headed flea stories, meaning that we conditioned ourselves to believe things that may or may not be true anymore. So based upon the reality of the great unwashed reality of the entire world, right? And that's unknowable to us as a whole, right? We select based on our experiences a small subset of that to, tap into. And then we give our attention to a little bitty piece of that we focus on, and that becomes what we condition ourselves to believe is our reality or is true. And you know what's strange is that Fred didn't know that he conditioned himself, didn't know that this limitation was there, didn't realize that he did it. But it still didn't change the fact that he's limiting himself. And so for him, that is his reality, right? That is what he believes is what's possible, what's impossible. The way it is, the way life is the way that he conditioned himself to believe it. So these Fred stories, as I call them, they get conditioned in us at very early ages, right? And we, just like Fred, we have no idea that they're even going on. They've become unconscious. At one point, it was very conscious, but it got conditioned into us. And it happened, and so now we don't even see it anymore, even though it's there. So it becomes part of like a computer operating system, if you will, our base operating system, where it's who we are. It's part of our identity, right? So let me give you an example of one of my early Fred stories. So that is the story of Fred the flat-headed flea, and how we all have these Fred stories that we don't know are actually stories that we came to believe is our reality, that is ironclad. What we see it's absolute, and so there's no questioning it anymore. Wayne, what's some thoughts that I know you have?
Yeah, I don't know that I've seen that video before, and it's just funny to me going, I we talk about Fred stories, and I forgot that Fred was the flea. I just gone. Like, we've been doing this for so long that I'm now just working with Fred stories and not, oh, Fred is the flea. Yeah, that's
Yep,
right.
yep.
So that,
It's Sir Fred the flat-headed flea.
yes. So that was fun to just realize, oh, that had gotten conditioned away. Hello, Fred. And the other thing that jumped out at me this go around was realizing that, coming from the NLP side, one of the things that we work with, I'm sure you've heard this whole thing about the definition of insanity, and right, you're doing the same thing over and over again, expecting different results. Great, we can go unpack that and all the edge cases and where it does and doesn't apply, but the piece there that's interesting to me is thinking through one of the things is just, hey, that thing that you're doing right now that's not serving you, guess what? It did serve you at some point. It was useful. It just may not be in this context or in this time frame, right? It may have been great for you 5 years ago, but doing it now, maybe not so much.
Yeah, but you're now assuming that people know that it was something that's not serving them, because it gets, the problem that
Mm,
we run into is that when we drive this so deep into our unconscious conditioned, our behavior patterns, we no longer see it. So just like Fred is jumping, it becomes part of who he is, and he can't sell out on himself because that would be quitting, that would be giving up. He would be a loser if he stops jumping. Yet he's never even though he's perfectly capable of jumping past the lid and jumping right out because that's actually how he got his flat head. The reality is that he doesn't see that's that he made the choice to not jump so high. So it's become invisible to him, even though it's not anything to do with reality, whether it served him or not, or is serving him or not in this moment, until he decides to make the unconscious conscious and see the truth of it, or dare to look at it and say, well, wait a minute. And for a lot of us in the beginning, it can become, because it does become a part of who we believe we are, these stories that are running us, that to dare to look at them and wonder what we'd be if it wasn't true, if who would be without them, feels as though it equals death. Literally, like we will die if we are not this person anymore, because it so messes with our identity of who we believe we are. And I'm not talking about from a metaphysical standpoint and all of that. I'm just talking about from a reality standpoint. Like, we get so attached to it looking a certain way. And there's a lot of useful things with this particular metaphor and approach to say, well, wait a minute. What if, like, there's everything that I have to be so, that I'm so doggedly determined that this is true. What if it wasn't? What if I have it and it's just the story that I've been telling myself? What if, and then be able to look at things from that perspective. Now you have freedom. Now you have the ability to expand. Now you have the ability to do what you're saying and say, well, wait a minute, is this serving me anymore? And is this really true? Or is it something that I made up as a limitation? Because as we've talked about in previous episodes, all thoughts, all beliefs are limiting beliefs, whether they serve us or not. There is it's a finite thought. It's a finite belief is what it is. There's a beginning and an end to it. And in reality, it may be serving us, and it may be serving us at certain points in time, like, hey, don't put your hand in the fire and burn yourself. Okay, that's good advice. But it also may be like, working against us. And it's never absolute one way or the other. So, just to be able to recognize when is a story, and it's the story that I'm making up about it that's causing me to feel a certain way. Because my reactions to my reactions that are based upon how we've defined it. So those are the things that I think are really useful to as takeaways from this. And I think that you go there so naturally, as do I, in terms of being able to coach yourself. But you've been doing this through your own means, through the NLP side, through your own personal work and dedication for so long, that you've lost sight of the fact that you make the unconscious conscious unconsciously. You know what I mean?
Oh, the irony.
Right. It becomes that's a part of your operating system to coach yourself. And all I'm saying is that as we get used to this, if you haven't ever done this before, it can serve you to just recognize that, wait a minute, let me stop for a second. How do I have this? And is this really true?
Yeah.
Is this true?
So what's the step that folks at home can do right now, today, to put this into action?
Well, obviously, or maybe not obviously, but obviously from my perspective, it's to start to think about, well, where has this been me? Where have I been Fred? And take away the identity piece, if you can, just suspend that and say, whatever, again, put on your white lab coat and your scientist mind, and bring out that clipboard and just look at the situation and think about, like, all right, so I am having a really strong reaction to something. So pick any topic, if you're picking the same topic and you're working towards it in terms of post-pandemic freedom, whatever that is, or if it's brand new, and just like, how do I have this? and what's absolute unbendable, and where is the cap on my jar? What is keeping me in there? And is it something that, am I able to see that it's something that I'm putting on myself, or does it appear as though it's a circumstance or an outside situation? And how does that look from that perspective? Because the more that you start to recognize it and be daring enough to put yourself in the Fred story shoes and not have it mean anything like other than, yeah, I did that. Okay, cool. Like it only has meaning. It only says something about me as a person if I allow it to define me. And I'm in charge of that. Whether I believe that in this present moment consciously or not, I'm in charge of, I'm just going to take it, Josh's advice at face value for right now, and say, all right, I don't really believe this, but I believe, but I believe in what Josh is saying. So I'm making this up. I'm saying that this is true for me. Okay. So now, isn't that interesting that I made up that story? All right, great. It doesn't have to be that way anymore. Does that make sense?
Yeah. And I really like the idea of using those emotions to say, hey, strong emotions mean I'm probably headed in the right direction for this task. Not that you get caught up in the emotion, but just notice, oh, hey, something's coming up. I'm probably poking in the right area.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, and remember back to the seesaw in the previous episodes, and the emotional intensity on both sides. So if it's really intense on the positive side or really intense on the fear-based emotions, then you know that the more intensity there are of there's it's not the situation, it's not what's going on that's making me feel this certain way. You're not a puppet on a string. You're not being controlled by the situation, by the circumstances. You have supreme power and choice to be able to choose your response, to actually respond to the situation. The problem is, and we will be going much deeper into this stuff in future episodes, the problem is that we've made automatic reactions. We're not responding to the situation, we're reacting to it, and we don't see that we're reacting to it. Why don't we see it? Because of our Fred stories, because of the unconscious conditioning that has made us, it's invisible, so it is making us right now respond a certain way or react a certain way. And we have lost the ability to choose because it's just automatic. We're that cat where somebody steps on our tail and, meow, we freak out. Whereas when I'm not talking about physical harm where you have an automatic pain reaction or whatever like that. I'm talking about where you feel a certain way about a certain situation, and that is defining you as a person, or you think it's defining you as a person. Really what's going on is that that's a script that you wrote, that's a story that you wrote that is playing now automatically. But because it is playing automatically, you no longer see it as a script or a story that you've been conditioned to respond in that way, and now you don't have a choice because you're automatically reacting. The more that you work with the tools that we're giving you, the more that you'll be able to have that space between what the situation is and then making a conscious decision, whether it's in memory or right now in the moment, how you choose to respond regardless of the way that that's been in the past. And that is what I would recommend.
Yeah, and I'm hearing echoes of the emails that we wrote. Where is it that folks can get those?
Yeah, it's well, if they go over to boldmolders.com and click on the Academy link, there's a 3-part article series that leads to a free email training series that breaks all of this down into bite-sized chunks, and it goes much, much deeper on Fred, much, much deeper on all of this, and does it in a way that is got some time, space, repetition in between for you. So that would be my recommendation in terms of what to do there.
Sounds good. Anything else before we close for the day?
No, I think that's enough to really dig into, and of course we'll be diving deeper into all of this in the future.
All right. Well then, on that note.
On that note.